Audit and Governance Committee on Thursday, 28th of November 2024 in the Houghton Suite, Winchester Guildhall. The time is 6:30 p.m. My name is Councillor John Morris. I'm chairperson of the committee. This meeting is live streamed from the Council's YouTube channel, and the recording will also be available after the meeting. Subtitles can be switched on, and advice on how to turn these on is set out on our website. Can I remind members to use their microphones, and can everyone ensure mobile phones are on silent? In the unlikely event that it is necessary to evacuate the building, the fire alarm will sound. Please follow all the instructions given to you by the team. Turning to the agenda, item 1 is apologies. I think we have apologies from. Do you want to? Okay, we have apologies from Councillor Pinniger, and Councillor Brophy has kindly stepped in to deputise. Thank you. Item 2 is disclosure of interest. Do we have any declarations? Okay, you've had your chance. Okay, item number 3, Chair's announcements. In this evening's meetings, I propose to change the agenda to swap items 9 and 10 around so that we have the completion report first, and then we have the report on what it's referring to afterwards, rather than the other way around. It seems to make more sense. No objections, good, thank you. Item number 4 is to note the Audit and Governance Programme for 24-25, which is on page 5 and 6. I'm sure as you look at that, you'll be take a sharp intake of breath in horror at how much there's 2 meetings listed for the 25th of February and the 6th of March.
Sorry, Chair. The 6th of March is actually the cabinet meeting that's
I see.
going to. So it's just the February date.
Okay. Well, I think considering how much workload there is there, we'll look at seeing what can be deferred to another meeting, because that does seem like to be an unrealistic amount for one meeting. But I shall leave that to officers to decide what is necessary to be discussed at that meeting. Yep.
Given your foresight in looking forward this far, would it be sensible to then arrange a date where we can meet to complete the work before the end of the municipal year, rather than either drop it or leave it to chance, because there's no planned meeting before the end of the municipal year?
Would that be
Sorry, yes, we'll have a discussion about that, and we'll endeavour to ensure that's the case.
Thank you. Moving to item number 5, the minutes of the previous meeting, which are on pages 7 to 10. Are they agreed? Thank you. Item 6 is public participation. We have no requests, so moving straight on to item 7, Treasury Management Report, which is to be introduced by Gemma Farley. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. This report sets out the performance of the Treasury Management function during the second quarter of 2024-25. All Treasury activity has complied with the Council's Treasury Management Strategy and Investment Strategy for 2024-25, and all relevant statute guidance and accounting standards. During the period that this report covers, bank rate was cut by 25 basis points to 5% in the Monetary Policy Committee's August 2024 meeting. Following the period, the bank rate was cut by a further 25 basis points to 4.75% in November. Since publishing this report, Arlene Close has updated its forecast and now expects to see base rate continue to reduce, but at a slower pace and by less, with another rate cut in February, followed by a series of further cuts. The new low is expected to be seen in December 2025, where base rate is currently predicted to be cut to 3.75%. Table 2 on page 16 of your papers shows the movement in the Council's Treasury Management position between the 30th of June and the 30th of September 2024. £100,000 of equal instalment of principal loan has been repaid during the period, and no new borrowing has been secured. The total investments balance has increased by £3.4 million. This movement is in line with the normal pattern of the council's cash balances at this time of year. Tables 3 and 4 on pages 18 and 19 provide a breakdown of the investments and borrowing positions. The largest movements in Table 4 are an increase of £4.5 million in UK Treasury bills and a reduction of £1.4 million in money market funds. The council holds cash in money market funds and other liquid options to meet very short-term liabilities, and also whilst in the process of allocating cash to other types of investments. Therefore, the reduction here alongside the increase in Treasury bills is expected. Money market funds have provided a good rate of return due to the high UK base rate. However, investment in Treasury bills increases the security profile of the portfolio, and as the UK base rate has reduced, the term investments have been used to increase the average yield of the portfolio. Table 5 on page 20 benchmarks the council's investments against other Arling Close clients. The average credit rating of the council's investment portfolio has improved from A+ to AA- due to the investments in Treasury bills. This action has also led to the bail-in risk of the portfolio reducing from 90% to 72%. Although this is higher than the average Arling Close client, this is reflective of the portfolio's allocation to money market funds and liquidity in general because of the smaller amount of cash that the council has. Arling Close deems money market funds as effectively bail-in light due to the high level of diversification of the underlying investments. Table 7 and graph 1 on pages 23 and 24 show the council's liability benchmark, which shows that the council expects a positive liability benchmark across the forecast period. And a positive liability benchmark that extends above the loans lines shows a need to take additional borrowing, as the balance sheet resources and current external borrowing combined are not sufficient to meet the capital financing requirement. Therefore, graph 1 illustrates that the council would need to source external borrowing if it is to meet the full delivery of its capital programme. The council will keep the position under review and will continue to take advice from Arling Close on the most appropriate time to borrow when it is required. That was all I was planning to say. If you've got any questions, happy to take them. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, questions? Councillor Godfrey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I very much welcome the additional information we've received in this report about the pooled investment, property investment fund. I wonder if it's possible for also to explain more about paragraph 17.18 about the what the Department for Levelling Up may require local authorities to do in the future, and what the options referred to, what options are available to the council in response to that change of statutory situation.
Okay, Gemma, can you answer that? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. So the pooled fund that the council owns shares in, it has a market value and a fair market value, and obviously that goes up and down over time. And I don't know why I'm losing my mind trying to answer this question. It's quite an easy one. I'm so sorry. So what will happen is from the 1st of April 2026, the council will have to show any gain or loss on that pooled fund in their accounts, even though it would be uncrystallised. So it's not a real gain or loss because those shares have not been sold. At the moment, there is an override in place, which means through accounting, you don't it is put into a reserve, and you don't have to show it in the same way. In terms of the options that are in place, the council could choose to keep that pooled fund and show the uncrystallised gain or loss on the balance sheet, or they could choose to sell their shares in the pooled property fund.
Be certain. And the text in the report explains what that might be. But for the impact on the annual revenue account in the future, would that be the year-on-year unrealised capital loss or increase? So in this case, £150,000 reduction over the last 12 months, or would it be the since purchase the £30,000 increase since we purchased them?
Mr. King, please. Mr. Aiken, sorry, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just to add to what Ms. Farley said, at the moment the unrealised gain or loss is going into one of our unusable reserves, and that's why there's a statutory override, because we don't actually have the cash, we can't spend it. When this is lifted, as Gemma said, we'll have to recognise it in our income and expenditure statement, so it will affect our surplus or deficit. To go specifically to your secondary question, Councillor Godfrey, it's the movement every year. So in this case, because that'll be the first year, if there's because we've got a capital gain, that will show as income. Because there is a risk that we would then spend that income, which we haven't actually received, we would move that to a separate reserve. And then if in the following year there's a loss, the first thing we would do would take it from that reserve. The risk, of course, is if the loss falls below the initial investment of 5 million, and we'd have to recognise the loss. I can't guarantee that wouldn't happen. However, our Treasury advisors consider the property market and property funds to be likely at their low, and the short to medium term outlook is a reasonable case that they will increase in value.
Thank you. Mr. Chamberlain.
Thank you, Chair. Forgive me, try and ask this question briefly. So if I compare the data in tonight's report versus the equivalent data from a report broadly from this time last year as it relates to the liability benchmark, sort of looking at kind of on a year-on-year change basis, there's a marked change to both the near-term forecast liability benchmark, and when I say near-term, by sort of within out to 2026 of circa 45 million. And if you look, much wider, where I appreciate there's much more uncertainty, indeed out to 2070, there's a near sort of fivefold difference in our forecast for loan CFR. So can we get a view from officers as kind of what's driven such a substantive change broadly within the last calendar year? And indeed, I guess extending from that, whether there's any near-term risks or threats that we should be kind of monitoring as a council that are not already on our radar.
Mr. Aiken.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try to answer as briefly as possible. So as the paper outlines, the liability benchmark's a tool to aid us to understand our potential long-term external borrowing requirement and to aid in decision-making around that. It does contain several significant assumptions on, for example, the level of capital spend, how likely we are to deliver it, a forecast of our future reserves and working capital. Because we're looking into the future and because of the size of the capital programme, for instance, those assumptions are subject to significant variance. So it wouldn't surprise me to see movements in the millions, with for the same period when you're looking one year to the other. However, and rightly you've noticed that 45 million is significant. The reason for that particular movement, or a large part of it, and why it's higher than you might expect it to be, is we've undertaken a review of the HRA capital programme from February 23 and February 24 and more recently in the outturn to profile. If you're familiar with the HRA programme, there's a line with significant budgets for unallocated sites of new build. We've reviewed those and moved the budgets further out because they were currently unrealistic, or they were unrealistic a year ago. So that's had a significant impact in the tens of millions. In terms of the longer term forecast, where I noted there is a very stark difference. It's twofold. So the methodology for presenting the longer term picture has been revised. In the previous year, Arlene Close produced the graph for us. They used 3 years of forecast to produce that. That's quite common because lots of councils only produce a capital programme that's 3 years into the future, or perhaps 5 years. Because we produce 10 years worth of data, we've in the current graph, we've given them the first 10 years, which means there's a lot more in it at the beginning to start with. The second thing that's making that line stay much higher is that we've the Arlene Close had previously assumed that as existing debt matured, we would not refinance it because that was how we forecasted when we had our self-financing settlement in 2012, when we took on all the housing stock from central government. However, in our HRA business plan, which we are at the moment reviewing, the assumptions changed that we'll be holding a higher level of debt in the HRA for a much longer period. In terms of whether that raises additional risks and concerns, I mean, clearly with any kind of borrowing, it includes risk, in particular in terms of interest rates and the ability of either the general fund or the HRA to service those debts. Whilst we can't mitigate every risk, HRA external debt is typically fixed longer term to reflect the length of the programme, and that does provide us some more certainty. Arlene Close's forecast for longer term borrowing rates are their central cases for them to remain roughly at the current level in the short to medium term, and that's reflected in the HRA budget and indeed in the general fund budget. So we've assumed those borrowing costs. The current macroeconomic environment, though, the election of Donald Trump in the United States, just one example, and wars all over the place, does introduce the risk of volatility. Because a lot of the assumption in the future is for capital spend that hasn't yet occurred, I would argue the biggest risk is to the viability of future schemes. If interest rates went up, we may not be able to deliver the new build programme, for instance, as we plan to. If you've got any follow-up questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Any follow-ups?
I don't think I have an immediate follow-up. Maybe by the time the next Treasury Management report's presented, I might have thought of one, just to say thank you. And I think it just confirms kind of essentially what we knew, which is how central the HRA is to our finances and our outlook. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Corson.
Thank you, Chair. This question is not so much about the content of this report, but about the frequency of the report, which I think is every quarter. And what I'd like to understand are the pros and cons of the council bringing this report to ANG every quarter, the team here reviewing it on a quarterly basis rather than an annual basis, and what are the extra risks that runs, and what work would it save if it was just annual? I'm sort of half expecting a sharp intake of breath on that, but just want to understand it so I understand why we do this every quarter. Thank you.
Mr. Aiken?
It used to be we did the Treasury Management Strategy, a mid-year report, and the outturn, and that was what the Treasury Management Code required. The Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy, that produces the Treasury Management Code, didn't think committees, audit committees or scrutiny committees were looking at it regularly enough. So it's now a requirement that we bring it quarterly. we think the three times you saw it before is enough, and I think colleagues at the county agree with that, or maybe not.
Just add to that, if that's okay. So there's two parts to this. The Treasury Management reports have to come 3 times a year. But the prudential indicators have to be seen 4 times a year by members. And the prudential indicators have to be attached to a finance report. And so it fits nicely that the Treasury Management prudential indicators goes on the end of a Treasury Management report.
Thank you. Councillor Corson, do you have a follow-up on that?
No, I don't think so. I think it's effectively mandated that we have to, so we have to. So there's not a TC 25 opportunity here.
No, I wish there was, because it's a couple of days work.
Councillor Brophy?
This is relating to Councillor Conroyson's question, the sort of the structural side of how this is conducted, and obviously HCC is conducting the Treasury Management Services. It's actually a question from Councillor Penninger, who wasn't here, who I think, to put it delicately, was just saying, given some of the volatility at HCC, are some of the resources ring fenced for us to have this service delivered to the same level as always, and what measures are being put in place? I guess the kind of question of ring fencing just generally was her concern that she wanted to raise.
Yes, there is a lot of volatility going on at the moment, just generally in local government, and Hampshire's financial situation has been well publicised. We provide, my team, the investments and borrowing team, we provide a treasury management function to 7 partners, including the County Council and the Pension Fund. We do provide extra revenue to the County Council, so it's not an area that the County Council is looking to cut. And so we will continue providing the service that we do.
Thank you. Yeah, just to add to that, we've had a service level agreement with the County Council, I think, since 2014. Yeah, thank you. So this is a well-established partnership where they are helping us to deliver our treasury management responsibilities, and that service level agreement is a contractual agreement that we have with the county. So I think they would approach us early within the contractual notice period if they were looking to change that arrangement at all. But as Mr. Farley says, I don't think it's a primary area where they're looking to make cuts and savings, because it pays for itself.
Thank you. Have any further questions? I'm sure last time I had one of these meetings, I skipped the debate sections I've been told off. So is there any debate on this issue? If not, then I shall suggest we move to the recommendations, which are that we note the Treasury Management Report for 24-25 and note the all Treasury management activity in the period was compliant with the Council's Treasury Management Strategy. Noted. Agreed. Thank you very much. Moving to item number 8 on the agenda, which is the final report and pay policy statement, which I think is going to be introduced by Gavjar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. The pay policy statement is provided in accordance with the Localism Act and is updated annually from 1st of April each year. The pay policy statement sets out Winchester City Council's policies relating to the pay of its workforce for the financial year of 2025-26, and in particular, remuneration of its chief officers, the remuneration of its lowest paid employees, and the relationship between remuneration of chief officers, remuneration of employees who are not chief officers. The purpose of the statement is to provide an open and transparent framework that ensures clarity, fairness, consistency in the remuneration of chief officers. And it also ensures that employees at all levels of the council are remunerated on a fair and equitable basis in accordance with equality legislation. There are no material changes to this report from last year. The main updates relate to salaries following the 2024 local government and 2024 chief executive pay awards, which were settled recently at the end of October. There's just a couple of points to note, really. The references to pay decisions referred to in the report to council at paragraphs 3.2.3, 7.1 and 10.3 are still in line with the revised constitution. And Human Resources have contacted the LGA via South East employers, and they're not aware of any policy changes proposed under the new Labour government that would impact on this. The recommendation in this report is that the pay policy statement for the financial year 2025-2026 is recommended to council for adoption. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, any questions on this issue? Councillor Godfrey first. Thank you.
Thank you. Just with clarity, two ratios in the section 5 on page 38 of the report. It deals with the ratio between chief officers and the lowest paid. In 5.2, am I right in thinking that ratio is the wrong way round, and it should be 5.7 to 1, not 1 to 6. That would make the lowest paid the highest paid, or I think. Just to make sure I understand what ratio we're displaying. And the other point is, I can't see in the report the gender pay gap, only what is the number of people at each grade who are employed who are either male or female. Do we not report on the gender pay gap, and if not, do we know what it is?
Thank you. I appreciate the question. I was also confused by the aspect of the ratio, so I look forward to the answer.
I think just on the ratio point, the highest to lowest is 1 to 5.6, which represents the difference between the highest paid 146,000, 25,000 for the lowest paid grade 3. Which I think that's correct. Yeah. Okay.
That's not what 5.2 said.
Sorry, 1. Yes, I think that's a punctuation issue there. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Sorry, could I defer to you, Samantha, on the second question?
Yes, we do report on the gender pay gap annually as we're required. So we have to publish figures on the snapshot date of the previous 31st of March, and we have to publish by the end of the next financial year. We do publish our gender pay gap figures, and the figure based on 31st of March 2023 was 15.2%. That was the median gender pay gap. Not in that report, but we do publish on the government apprenticeship, government gender pay gap service, and we publish on the Winchester City Council website.
Thank you. Councillor Conwayson.
Yes, thank you. A question in the same area, and it relates to the policy, around the ratio of the highest paid employee to the lowest paid employee, and we have a policy that it has to be below 20 to 1. I think that's as it's stated. The reality is it's significantly less than that. It's well under 10 to 1. So I wonder, what is the purpose of keeping it at 20 to 1 when, in fact, if the policy was something closer to reality, it might act as a flag to identify that something's going squiffy. So what's the reasoning, apart from the fact that the 2011 Hutton reviews said that was a reasonable number?
I'm happy to take that one. That's a nationally set policy rather than a local one, hence the reason for it. It applies to the entire public sector.
So my supplementary is, if the national policy doesn't appear to be helpful in any way, do we have scope to vary it locally and just say, you know what, it's not helpful?
No, my understanding is we have to stick with the legislation that's in place.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Chamberlain.
Thank you, Chair. My question relates to section 3.4, specifically on the market review. So the report alludes to it says from time to time, comparison will be undertaken against market review. So my question is just is simply, when was the last time that we did a market review to benchmark our remuneration and benefits, if I can say the word?
Who's going to answer?
Sorry, Samantha, you okay to say that one?
The last time we would have done that for the whole organisation would have been in 2019 when we did where we had the introduction of the new pay spine and we realigned our grades on that new pay spine. We haven't done a corporate review of pay. We did change our pay beginning of April last year, but we would do benchmarking if there were individual recruitment pressures. That would be our benchmarking at the moment.
I'm going to take a turn, which is on page 35, the aspect of targeted recruitment to Golden Hellos. When we do a pay increase for benchmarking, it has to be passed by Executive Leadership Board. Does that also apply to Golden Hellos, or is that at the discretion of the officer?
Yes, golden handshakes or golden handcuffs, they would be approved by ELB.
Councillor Brophy.
Just coming back to the market reviews, it mentions that you don't benchmark against London because obviously the cost of living, but benchmark against similar areas. Obviously, Winchester does have a very high cost of living, and given 2019 was the last time that was reviewed, do we feel that the benchmarking was adequate to comparable areas? I noticed you mentioned West Sussex and Surrey, so presumably that's the case, but I think you possibly answered the question already based on the fact that you would review based on employment pressures, but what's the process of making sure that we're in line with the cost of living in the area?
I think those that we refer to, they are our guidelines that we'd work to. We wouldn't take London into account because that's almost doesn't have a ceiling to it. Our comparators really are cost of local government. We take into account private pay because we have to, because that's a reality. We're competing with the private market, and we would extend beyond the authorities that we say that we benchmark against.
Do you have supplementary, Brophy?
It's not quite a follow-up to that, but it was something related to, which was the commitment to the minimum wage. Sorry, my computer has just gone frozen. These new laptops decide to turn off and save energy for the council every 2 minutes, which is fortunate. The Living Wage Foundation employer commitment agrees to a nationally minimum wage hourly rate to directly employed employees. Do we have any practice in place for contractors when we're outsourcing to make sure that we're paying a fair wage, or mandating that through, our service level agreements or KPIs?
Yeah, in terms of our sort of major procurement contracts, they are mandated for minimum wage.
Can I ask a supplementary on that? Are the wages going to be comparable to those of the ones we pay directly, or are we getting work cheap from people by using outside contractors?
I wouldn't say getting work cheap. I mean, I think we can only mandate to a certain extent, and I suppose the market will dictate to some extent what they pay under those. So we have those sort of those safety measures in place, but we can't sort of dictate beyond that.
Thank you. Any further questions? Okay, thank you. We move to debate. Any words of wisdom? Thank you. No, in that case, I suggest we move to the recommendations, which are on page 27, which is that the pay policy statement for the financial year 2025-26 is recommended to Council for adoption. Is that agreed? Thank you. Moving to item number 10, excitingly, because we've rejigged the order, so this key is to introduce the annual financial report.
So I think Mr. Souter will introduce the auditor's annual report first.
Oh, sorry, yes.
Very much, and good evening, members. So I'm here this evening to present our completion report for the financial year 22-23, and that starts on page 161 of this evening's papers. So normally our equivalent report would set out all the procedures we had previously undertaken on your accounts, which I'll get the next item. And historically, we've been in a position to assure you that from the combination of those procedures, your previous accounts have all been materially accurate. But I'm afraid this year is a little bit different. So the key headline of our report this year is our intention to disclaim the audit for the council, which we have discussed at this meeting previously, both with myself and also with Simon Mathers, who has taken over from me as the partner for your audit from the financial year 23-24. So we are disclaiming the accounts as a measure to clear the backlog that has built up over the last few years in local authorities across the country, again, which we have discussed in previous meetings of this committee. We now have the required legislation in place to be able to move forward with this, and the first backstop date has been set by government to clear this backlog is the 13th of December 2024. So that means all local authorities have to have their accounts published and with an audit opinion of some sort in place by that date for the years up to 2022-23. For a number of authorities, that means they have quite a few years to catch up on. For yourself, it's just the 1 year we're talking about. And inevitably, this does mean that a large number of audits are not going to be completed by this date to be able to reach an unqualified conclusion. And hence there will be a large number of disclaimed audits across the country. And that's the situation we have here. So I need to emphasise two main headlines. So this is not unique to this council. As I said, there will be a large number, probably in the hundreds of delayed local authority audits that are going to have to be disclaimed by the backstop date. And secondly, a disclaimer is not saying that there is anything wrong with your accounts. To say that there is something wrong, you have had to do the full audit. And that's the point here, is we have not done that full audit. And what our disclaimer is going to be saying, that we are not giving an opinion because we have not done sufficient work to be able to reach an opinion on your accounts. If there was something wrong or something attributable to a fault of this council, for example, a failure to actually prepare your accounts in sufficient time, we would draw that one out much more clearly and we would be making much more pointed comments about the situation. But I can emphasise that is not the case. You have had a track record of producing your accounts. You have had a good track record of supporting your audits. But unfortunately, due to the backlog that's been built up and the finite nature of our resources, we have had to make some difficult decisions of how to deploy those resources across our full cohort of audit clients. And we have decided that what our strategy was to get back onto the most recent set of information in line with previous ministerial statements. And so therefore we've had to reach the conclusion that for 22-23 we just did not have the resources to be able to complete the necessary work. Our report still sets out a number of aspects we're required to report to you either under auditing standards or the Code of Audit Practice. For example, it still says what the risk would have been if we had been undertaking an audit and the materiality level we would have employed. Unfortunately, because of the situation I've described, we don't then go on to say what's our response to those risks, what's the finding, because we haven't done the work to actually then tell you those issues. We are still required to give a view on your value for money arrangements, and we have done that work, which again was in line with the ministerial statement that auditors should concentrate on the value for money arrangements and make sure they were up to date on that. We reported our views on value for money to you back in February of this year. Yeah, just checking, it was February. And section 4 of our report here this evening, that aspect starts on page 182 of your agenda pack, is unchanged from the previous information we've already brought to this committee and we previously discussed back in February. So as such, I wasn't going to go into any detail on that aspect of our work, but the key message on value for money is that we had no matters to report by exception. We are satisfied that Council had arrangements in place to give value for money to its taxpayers and stakeholders during that financial year. Given we did undertake that aspect of our work, we do think it's important to continue to assure you that we do remain independent of the council in informing that view. The final aspect I would just like to highlight is that this committee has previously asked both myself and my colleague Simon what is happening around the fees for the year. And unfortunately, I still don't actually know. So this is the remit of public sector audit appointments who set the fees, and the regulations that set up public sector audit appointments really didn't envisage this situation occurring. So as I understand, they are still working up a solution how to set the fee for the year. And unfortunately, because that's still in process, I can't give you any better answer than that at this point in time. So that concludes my presentation and introduction to our report, and I will be happy to try and answer any questions you might have.
Okay, questions from councillors. Councillor Comoison's first. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for that report, that verbal report. You mentioned that there are hundreds of councils that are getting the same level of disclaimed audit. Can you give us some feel for what percentage of Ernst & Young's public sector auditing that accounts for? Is it 25%, 50, 75, or close to 100, or somewhere, something in between that? Just want to get a sense of how exceptional is this for us, or if like everybody's going through it, it changes the perspective. Thank you.
Yeah, so Councillor, you are not unique here. This is not a situation that just applies to Winchester. It doesn't just apply to audits in Hampshire. This is across Ernst & Young's portfolio of audits across the country, but it's not just Ernst & Young, it's all the other audit providers as well. I don't have statistics and proportions. We will find that one out on the 13th of December once the backstop date has passed, but it is going to be a significant number of disclaimers.
Councillor Godfrey.
Thank you, Chairman. I suppose the important thing is, as our role as the audit committee, is to make sure that we shouldn't be investigating further into council's finances. Given there's now 18 months since this period ended, and the next report, the next year's audit should have been completed by now, and the finances have been operating on the basis that the annual report that we're looking at tonight is correct, and therefore we've been working to it for 12 months. How much weight should we give to your report, good and bad? In fact, there's a disclaimer. I can't see we can do anything about it anyway. So why should we just spend any more time on this at all?
Mr. Souter.
So we have to communicate these matters to you. So that's one item to at least receive the report. We need to explain why we have reached a situation where we are, and I think it's important to reinforce the message that this is not of your making. So I think that is an important thing that the councillors should be noting. We do give you assurance over your value for money arrangements, which I've outlined. But I think other than that, the key message is we are not giving you assurance on your financial statements, and so therefore that aspect, yes, you probably could, if that was your intent, just move on, because that assurance now needs to come from Mrs. Keys and her finance department in terms of presenting those numbers to you on your next item, because we have not done the audit, and that cuts to the chase.
Do you have a supplementary on that? Okay, Councillor Comoison, please.
Thank you. I note that the full audit is due to come to this committee for the following year, and we should be hearing that reading that on in February. At this point in time, what level of confidence have you that Ernst & Young will be able to deliver that for that February meeting?
So on the basis that it's not my audit responsibility is my colleague Simon Mathers. I do work closely with him. He seems comfortable that the audit is moving ahead, and you will have a report to your next meeting. We will have to bring a report because we will have a backstop date in place. So you will have a report of some kind. Anything further than that, I just genuinely don't know because it's not my audit responsibility anymore, I'm afraid.
I guess my supplementary to that, and I probably should have been a bit more precise in the question, is I appreciate it. Maybe your colleague will have that view. Is there any risk that that will be a disclaimed report, or and what I'm trying to get here is like it's pretty well December. It's 3 months away. But if we're going to get a full audited report that isn't disclaimed, then it kind of changes the perspective on how we look at this.
So the audit team have been in and they have been working. So it's not a similar position to the 2022-23 accounts where we have just not done the work. So the audit team have been here. The report, the outcome is still likely to be a disclaimer. What we have to do is make clear to you why that is the reason, and the reason will be because we haven't got the assurance that you'd normally have over all your closing balances from the previous year that then roll forward into your opening balances. And that's the guidance that the National Audit Office have set out in terms of their timescales of how this will unwind over time. But we have done work, and that work will contribute to rebuilding. But I'm afraid because you have to rebuild over time, you do start off that initial rebuild with a position where you have very big gaps. Now those gaps will close over time, and we will move from disclaimer through to properly modified opinions and then through to clean opinions over a period. So it's not immediately going to go away, but I can assure you we have been doing work and we have started on that journey. And that was part of our strategy to start getting up to date. If we'd have concentrated all our resources on 22-23 audits, 18 months old, as Councillor Godfrey has already pointed out, we would then be in a position where for 23-24 we wouldn't have had any resource. We'd have disclaimed those ones, and then we'd have been starting that rebuild a further year behind. So that has been part of our thinking and how we would, or which years we would apply our strategy to say, right, this is the one we're going to have to essentially pass over to get back on track.
Okay, thank you for that expectation management. Thank you.
Okay, and Ms. Keith.
I only wanted to add to reassure committee that there is an EY team on site undertaking the audit of the 2023-24 accounts at the moment. They're doing a very thorough job of going through the 23-24 accounts, and they've been on site for several weeks, and I imagine them to be on site for weeks to come. So they are undertaking that work and doing a full audit of 2023-24.
Okay, no questions from guests. It's my turn. Looking through the report, the recurring phrases I see is no significant risks identified and no significant weaknesses identified. Would it be correct to characterise the process of audit that if there were significant risks or weaknesses, that you would have found them, and we can take assurance but by the fact that they haven't been identified?
Yep, so that is correct in terms of the value for money work that we have undertaken, yes. And I would genuinely hope so, yes. The purpose of our work is to try and identify those risks where they exist and to then undertake work to see if that risk is actually real. So is it a real weakness, or has the council got sufficient arrangements in place? Now, from our planning, we didn't identify any risks, and so therefore we haven't followed through and done any further work on that one. It doesn't mean we've done nothing. The risk assessment is quite comprehensive for our value for money arrangements. But to get back to your direct question, yes, hopefully so. That is the point of the audit. So if we haven't found risks, identified problems, then you should be able to take assurance that there are no such problems there for that financial year.
Thank you. It's nice to be able to take some assurance, even though it's a disclaimed opinion. My follow-up on that is the value for money report, which seems to conclude that the council has arrangements in place to make informed decisions and continue to provide its services. This isn't what a reader of which magazine would regard as a value for money assessment. So are we missing a part here where you would give an idea of how much council taxpayers, what their value for their money would be in terms of services, or is it just an assessment of how viable the council is?
It's an assessment across three criteria: financial sustainability, governance arrangements, and improving economy efficiency and effectiveness. What we can't say is definitively, no, the council is giving value for money. That is incredibly subjective. It depends upon your policies, it depends upon your viewpoint, it might depend upon your politics, for example, and that's not our remit. So the Code of Audit Practice requires us to look at the arrangements the council has in place. If you have the right arrangements in place, then, for example, in terms of governance, if you put the right information from officers to councillors, then you should take the right decisions by virtue of having the right information in front of you. So that is all we can do as auditors, is to look at those arrangements, and we are happy in terms of the arrangements, the criteria we've looked at, that you do have the appropriate and correct arrangements in place to therefore give that value for money.
Thank you. Are there any further questions from councillors? I then move to debate. Any sort of... Okay, and then I suggest we move to the recommendations from page 159. And make you wait, which is that we consider the matters presented in the report, and we've taken the opportunity to raise any points, and we approve the letter of representation. Is that agreed? Agreed. Okay. I neglected to thank other people who came, but thank you, Kevin Suter, for your report. Moving to item 10, which is previously item 9, Liz Keys to introduce the annual financial report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the annual financial report 22-23. The draft version of that was brought to you 18 months or so ago for information, and this evening committee is asked to approve the statement of accounts. As you've just heard from Mr. Suter, ordinarily you would have had a full report from our external auditors detailing the work that they've done and any issues that they wanted to bring to your attention. Obviously, you don't have that for these 22-23 accounts, but I can draw your attention to the statement of responsibilities where I have signed those, not on the public version before you today, but I have signed that statement to say that I certify that they give a true and fair view of the financial position of the council as at the 31st of March 2023. So whilst I'm happy to take any detailed questions on these accounts, you're asked to approve those this evening. And as I said earlier, just to reassure members that the 2023-24 accounts are having a very thorough audit, and I would anticipate the auditors identifying any ongoing issues through that work.
Thank you. So any questions on the annual financial report? Councillor Godfrey.
Thank you, Sean. I wonder, Ms. Keys could tell us when we have to approve the annual financial report for 23-24, and will we have that on the schedule of activity? Because it's not yet on there so far.
Yeah, so you'll see on the work plan for the February meeting that you will have the statement of accounts for 2023-24 coming forward, and the backstop date for the publication of those, I'm looking longingly at Mr. Suter to help me out here, is
The end of February.
the end of February. Thank you.
I think that's why February is going to be such a packed meeting with both those items on it. Councillor Cromwelson.
Yeah, thank you. I have two questions. One is a presentational question, and the other is trying to understand a couple of things. So the presentational question is that in the tables, I see sort of red being used for numbers which are like income numbers, and black being used for negative numbers, and that's completely contrary to my very basic understanding of accounts. which is all in the private sector. So, and as I was reading the tables, I was thinking, I'm sensing double negatives going on in my brain. So it was just creating a bit of distance. So I want to just understand why we have that convention. And was it actually intentional, or is it actually a mistake? So if you could help me out, that's a presentational question. The other question relates to the relationship between HRA and the general fund. I'm just trying to find the example. I think it was in page 72. There's a general fund movement table. There's other references to it, where it seems to be bringing in an adjustment for HRA surplus. Now, my previous understanding has been that the HRA is a completely separate ring-fenced account from the general fund. So I was just intrigued as to why we have this reference in the general fund accounts that relates to HRA. Am I showing my naivety here?
No, not at all with either of those questions. The presentational one, to take that one first, it is a public sector accounting convention to use minus numbers to show credits and positive numbers to show debits. So whilst to you it looks like it's back to front, if you have a history of looking at private sector accounts, after 24 years of local government accounts, it makes perfect sense to me. But but it's deliberate like that. It's the convention that we're required to follow when we present local government accounts. The second point, you're absolutely right. The general fund and the HRA are very separate ring-fenced accounts, and money doesn't cross over the ring fence. The point of this table is to try and show the reconciliation between the general fund and HRA movements and the council's accounts. So this statement of accounts is for the general fund and the housing revenue account. So they are combined in the comprehensive income and expenditure statement and the asset notes, etc. So this is trying to reconcile what you would see in, say, the outturn reports and the notes around the HRA and the general fund specifically with the main statements.
Okay, thank you. I seem to have on a number of questions stumbled into, well, it's just the way it is. It's the law or whatever. So apologies for that. I'm still slightly confused as to why we have the HRA numbers in a table that sits under the general fund movement. If what we're doing is trying to consolidate the general fund, you know, give an overall view that incorporates both the general fund and the HRA, wouldn't it be called something different to the general fund?
Yeah, so it is trying to reconcile the surplus on the provision of services, which is a line that you find on the comprehensive income and expenditure account, which is the combined impact of the HRA and the general fund. So the whole organisation's surplus on the provision of services. So this table is trying to show how that is separated out into the general fund and the HRA. Not very well by the sounds of things.
Okay, I think I probably need to have a quick lesson in this in this area, I think, but not in this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Aiken?
Probably not helping and probably adding to the confusion. Technically, the HRA is ring-fenced within the general fund. It's a separate part of the, which is why we show the accounts on an overall basis. And then if you look at the later notes, you'll see the HRA part. So you can't cross that ring fence, but it is part of it legally, which probably doesn't help.
That does help actually, so thank you.
I share Councillor Conway's confusion, because I think the general fund seems to refer to different things on different pages, which is liable to cause confusion. Councillor Brophy.
It was a question about the defined benefit scheme and the risks to the scheme, which would be charged to the general fund, you know, if they became kind of issues. And I suppose the question I had was, it talks about various risks to that, including things like longevity, presumably of people living longer. But also I did wonder, do we have any other significant risks that we anticipate to the pension scheme in terms of things like, I know, stranded assets from investments in things like property or fossil fuels or anything like that? Are there any concerns there in terms of long-term health of the general fund?
So Winchester City Council takes part in the local government pension scheme as part of the Hampshire Pension Fund, which is administered by Hampshire County Council. So they are responsible for the investments of the fund. So that's not something that we deal with here in my team. But we do have an actuaries report which is produced for us, and they're obviously looking at the asset structure and the risks associated with the fund. And annually they give us an update of those areas of risk, such as life expectancy, etc. So no, I've not got any additional risks to the pension fund, and in fact the pension fund is in a much better position now than it would have been if you'd been looking at our balance sheet sort of 6 or 7 years ago.
Thank you. Any further questions from councillors? Okay, any general discussion? And if not, then I suggest we move to the recommendations. We approve the audited statement of accounts from all the way back in 22-23, and for the chair, I sign the statement of responsibilities to certify the accounts and authorise the issue. Is that agreed? Thank you. Then we move on to item 11, which is Q2 governance monitoring, which introduced by Simon Hanson. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This report brings to you an update on our governance monitoring arrangements through Q2 of this year. And in the usual format that you'll have seen before, there is an update on the progress against the internal audit actions arising from recent internal audit reviews. And I'm delighted to be able to say that we're running actually at the moment with just 2 overdue internal audit actions, and a brief update is actually given in the report as to the progress of those. And I completely accept that one of those actions has been around for a little while, but happy to give an update on that particular audit action. And there was one internal audit issued and finalised during the last quarter, and that related to food safety, and that received reasonable assurance. The report goes on to provide an update on our corporate risk register, progress against the actions that were included in the annual governance statement that was approved earlier this year, and also around the code of conduct complaints. For this report, there is also an appendix covering the annual corporate health and safety report, which was brought to this committee last year in July. It comes to this report on an annual basis and provides a review of the work of our corporate health and safety officer, and includes an update on the governance arrangements, individual service updates, the work that she has been doing through the last year, as well as a review, an update on the accidents and incidents that were reported during the year. So that action appendix only comes to you annually, so that is a one-off. But happy to take any questions on the content of the report. Sorry, just finally before I finish, Mr. Harvey is here from the Internal Audit Partnership, who would be able to help run through the internal audit quarterly report.
Thank you. As this is quite an extensive thing, I was hoping we could go through the introduction and go look at each of the appendices in turn, if that's a reasonable way of sort of focusing our attention. So is there any sort of questions on the general report as a whole, the first section, before we get to the appendices? Okay, so I just go to appendix 1, the action plan update. Any sort of questions on that? Well, I have a question if no one else does, which is that the implementation of disposal of our files and our computer systems, and I'd just like to know just how that is performed, whether it's council officers smashing up hard drives or just putting lots of papers into shredding machines. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So officers are working in accordance with our recently adopted retention and disposal policy and schedule. That schedule sets out the length of time that we're required to keep documents, either according to legislation or local arrangements. A number of documents are kept for 2 years, anything up to 7 years. Some documents are kept indefinitely. So we're applying those schedules to both paper documents and to our electronic records. We're thoroughly going through electronic documents on our servers to ensure that those policies are rigorously applied, and where documents are no longer required, we're working with our IT colleagues to ensure that they are appropriately and securely deleted documents that we don't need to keep anymore, and that there's no longer access, and then we do keep the documents that we do actually need to keep. So we're absolutely relying on our IT colleagues to appropriately dispose of those digital records and documents in the most appropriate way. In terms of our paper documents, we're working with an external partner to ensure that confidential information, confidential papers are appropriately disposed of and shredded to make sure that they are no longer around with us, and any other documents are obviously recycled. So absolutely following best practice in terms of destroying those documents that we no longer to keep.
Thank you very much. So if there's no further questions on this, we'll go to Appendix 2, which is the Internal Audit Progress Report. Councillor Chamberlain.
Thank you, Chair. It's my question relates to CR4 on page 235, and I fear it may be one of the more obvious questions tonight, but given our kind of lived example over the last 10 days or so with the IT outage and issues that's been facing the council, and indeed the kind of the impact to multiple customer sort of facing, public facing services that we've seen, can I ask whether kind of the controls as presented in the report really do still stand, and if the view of the officers are that they do, is there anything that we've learnt over the last week to 10 days or so that we need to put in place as additional measures, noting that it is of course early days after the IT outage?
Thank you. Yes, we really have put our disaster recovery plans into action over the last 7 days. It has only been 7 days, but it feels like a lot longer. Yes, we've had some issues with IT servers which were taken offline, and that meant that we couldn't access any of our systems as a council on Thursday morning. We very quickly stepped up our disaster recovery plans, those plans that you hope you're never actually going to have to use. We dusted them all off, and I'm really pleased to report that within 48 hours we had 95% of services up and running again. We were able to make payments to people, take direct debits, which is really an impressive feat, I think, and testament to good planning by our IT team, and also being in the excellent position of having a shared IT service with a neighbouring authority, which enabled us to step up services by essentially running from our sister site over in Andover. So yes, all those current controls are very important. I think they were all in place. I think we initiated our disaster recovery plan in line with expectations and the tests that we run annually. And of course, we're very early days into the recovery phase from this, but yes, there will be lots of lessons to learn operationally for services, and to ensure and improve our resilience in the future. So we will go through a thorough post-event review when the time is appropriate.
Okay, Simon Howson.
Thank you, Chair. Just to add what Ms Keys has said around business continuity and the business, our business continuity plans are reviewed on an annual basis, and we have our business critical services based on a very thorough impact assessment. Each of those business critical services have their own business continuity plan, which sets out how those services will continue to be run. They're generally public facing in the event of an incident such as last week's. I think what's worth adding is that last Thursday, obviously when it happened in the morning, very, very few staff actually came in. So the cascade of communicating with staff worked thoroughly, and we were less than 10, 15 staff actually in the building as normal. So those actual messaging and cascade systems worked. We were able to activate those business continuity plans for services, notwithstanding that for the initial period, they didn't have access to IT, so that they were still able to, as far as possible, maintain those public facing services in the event of not having IT. So aside from the IT disaster recovery plan that's already been spoken about, we do have very robust business continuity arrangements, business continuity plans, which were stood up during that time to ensure that there was seamless service provision to our customers, residents and businesses.
Councillor Chamberlain, supplementary.
So thank you both, first of all, for the response, and I guess heartened by the response as well. It's interesting because, you know, in financial services and critical national infrastructure, you know, 48 hours would simply be too long. You know, that's almost an existential, you know, point with that duration. However, I fully appreciate we are neither, and you know, the public facing services were recovered. I think my only ask would be, if I am actually allowed, Chair, is that with activities such as this and, you know, issues such as this, there are always lessons to be learned. So I think going forward, it'd be good to see, you know, if there are to be updates to any of the controls, to see those presented in the report as we move forward.
Councillor Godfrey.
Thank you. I having been involved in approving the original IT implementation plans when we changed the responsibilities for the hosting of services. I do have a certain ownership of this, and blame me. But I think it would be appropriate for this committee to see a report on the activation of that disaster recovery and business continuity plan implementation. Once there's time to breathe again after last week, if the chairman would permit, I think it would be a useful exercise to confirm that what went on was appropriate and something this committee should be looking at.
Thank you. I broadly agree. So those cases.
Yes, Chair. Given the significance of this risk on the corporate risk register, I think it's very reasonable for a summary of the lessons learned to come back to committee at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Councillor Moyson.
Just to follow up really on Councillor Chamberlain's question, and really just to establish where are we now? Are our own systems back up and running fully, or are we still dependent on the Test Valley system in Andover? And I guess during the period where we are relying on our partner over there, both they and us are running in a situation where we don't have the backup necessarily, unless you're going to tell me that actually the recovery immediate systems change and they put another backup in somewhere. Thank you.
Yes, so first of all, I'll just reassure you that we have now got backups running. We have physically moved equipment, checked it, turned it on, and we are backing up. So we are, yes, we're back in a resilient fashion, and we have those backups of our data and of Test Valley's data to ensure that we're in a better position than we were. We have nearly all services operational, and from the customer's point of view, they are able to contact the council on the telephones, they can email in with web forms, they can visit the offices if they need to, and hopefully from the customer's point of view, they would not know anything is going on. As I say, we're in the early stages of our recovery now as we move services back towards Winchester. But other than some of our telephony systems relying on a network that we can't yet switch on, the vast majority of services are available.
I'll just ask another follow-up on that. I noticed the app for the leisure centre was not working for the last couple of days. Is that related or is it coincidental?
That's a coincidence. That's nothing to do with me.
Okay, I've got another question regarding the rolling work programme. Still on IT area, the cybersecurity draft report is December 22, and given this is regarding page 225. Considering that things like cybersecurity is a fast-moving area where technology is always changing and new computer viruses are being invented, is there a likelihood that, first of all, we need a final report, but also is there danger that the work done is going to become out of date and you're going to need to go back and start again? Thank you.
I'm happy to start off, and then if Mr. Harvey wants to chip in, feel free. To reassure committee, we've had another independent full review of our cyber posture, and I think I spoke at committee about it last time, where a third party has come in and done a full review of our cyber resilience and the systems and processes that we have in place, because we're very aware that as time moves on, technology moves on, threats move on, so it's very important to keep up to date on that. So that supplements the work that the Southern Internal Audit Partnership have done.
Councillor Power?
Thank you, Chairman. Could I go back to the cause of the flood, please? We've talked about the consequences, but what have we done to look at the cause of the flood and see if we can prevent that happening in the future? Thank you.
Yeah, I'd hesitate to use the word flood. There was a leak in some of the plumbing systems in the Guildhall, which is where our server room is located, and they have been dealt with by a plumber. The systems have been turned off. We're again in recovery mode for the building. We're drying everything out. And clearly we're going to make changes to the location of water versus electrical equipment going forward.
Thank you. If no further questions on Appendix 2, I suggest move forward to Appendix 3, which is yes, the Code of Conduct complaints. Any questions on this section? That's very, very quiet. So that takes us to Appendix 4, which is the Corporate Risk Register. Councillor Godfrey.
Thank you. I know this is only published for our information to give us an understanding of what is on the Corporate Risk Register. But given that the review of a risk strategy is due to be carried out at our next meeting, the all-day event in February, could I ask for a summary of how the risk register is maintained and used, and whether or not there are any concerns that the corporate risk register is not being effective?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so in the risk policy that, as you say, will be coming to this committee at its next meeting and does do annually, the process for risk management and risk monitoring is set out in detail, and risks are separated out right down from operational risks through to the corporate risk register, and depending on where risks sit on those registers, they go through a regular process. So services regularly review their operational risks, and should an operational risk become red or need to be escalated, it's brought forward to the quarterly risk review meeting at the Executive Leadership Board. ELB, as I say, quarterly review all of the risks, look at all of the corporate risks in particular and the current controls to ensure that they are still mitigating the risk and that the risk score doesn't need to be adjusted. And then that forms part of this quarterly report, which comes through to committee. So there is a process that happens regularly and periodically throughout the year, and that is all set out in the annual risk policy.
And if we were to see a record of the ELB meetings, how much activity would be recorded on the risk registers?
So discussions on the risks themselves are minuted, along with any changes to the risk registers, and also ELB's response to any escalated risks, whether ELB feels it's necessary to bring those on to the corporate risk register, for instance. So yes, those meetings are minuted, and all of that information is captured.
I have a question which is regarding CR004 on page 235, the risk of an incident which has an impact on the ability of the council to provide its services. And one of them is communication systems ineffective, which does seem to describe what happened last week. So can I ask whether the recent incident is going to lead to a modification of this part of the risk register?
Yes, while my IT colleagues were dealing with the immediate aftermath of the server outage, we were reviewing the risk register to look whether we needed to update any of the other risks or this corporate risk in particular. And as part of our learning that we do from this incident, as part of the wash up from it and the review, we will update the risk register, but no changes were made as a result of what happened last week.
Thank you. Any further questions on Appendix 4? Okay, so that takes us to the recommendations.
Appendix 5.
Oh, Appendix 5, sorry. Health and safety, yes. Oh, the people falling from a great height. Go for it. Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Chairman. Could I dig into the accidents report on page 249, please? We've got fire, near miss, injured by animals. What processes do we have in place to look at each of those and decide if we have to modify our procedures? And how is that reported? Thank you.
Chair, I don't have that information with me, but I can take that question back and find out and report back to the committee with an answer in a couple of days.
Thank you very much. I think that would be useful, Chairman, to make sure we are trying to prevent recurrence.
Yes, thanks. I have a question and then go to Councillor Commissioner after my question, which is regarding the accidents and incidents. When accidents occur to contractors, is that data also captured, or is that regarded as in their business entirely?
This does not include contractors. They have their own arrangements for reporting and dealing with incidents. This is Winchester City Council's own.
Councillor Commissioner.
Yeah, it's not. I'm trying to frame it as a question, but really it's a request. That chart is presented in terms of percentages, and initially I thought the numbers were reasonably large, and then when I actually read following text, realised that actually we just divide the percentages by 3, and you get to the actual number of incidents. And I think, given those low numbers, it might be better if it was just presented as numbers of incidences, because, you know, 2 people injured by animal, I'm guessing that's almost certainly the dog warden dealing with an incident. Two instances is probably 2 more than we'd like to see, but it's not doesn't seem like an unreasonable number. The same with, you know, the sort of verbal abuse and threatening behaviour. If you bring those down to sort of 7, 8 number, I'm almost surprised it's that low. You know, given the sort of instant situations that some of our officers sometimes find themselves in, I could imagine that number being quite a lot higher. So I just think it might be, where the numbers are so low, it might be better just putting them in as numbers rather than percentages. But maybe there's a reason for doing it this way.
Chair, thank you. No, we will look to improve this next time we bring this report to you in a year's time. Thank you for your comments.
If I could do a follow-up on the same point, essentially, is that in order to interpret this data, we need sort of something to compare it to. So would it be possible to combine it with incident reports from previous years to know if Winchester is becoming safer or more dangerous for employees, and also to possibly to compare it with the national average, so that we also have another sort of a watermark to work against?
Thank you, Chair. We'll look to take the opportunity to compare trend analysis with previous years and indeed other organisations to give a more contextual set of data.
Any more questions on Appendix 5? In that case, I move to the recommendations, which is, oh, Councillor Brophy.
Apologies, Chair. Just on that, we talked about the changing trend line in terms of risks, but obviously included in this is the guidance and training for staff. Do we have any evidence of the impacts of some of the training and the interventions that have been taking place in terms of how effective they've been, or not, in terms of addressing risks? Can I just check, would that be the appropriate format for reporting it within this document, or would that lie somewhere else in terms of determining how successful or otherwise we're being?
Chair, it's something we can consider. I think it's helpful to understand the training that's available to staff and the take-up of that training, and then latterly perhaps to try and understand the influence that that training has had on staff and supporting them. So perhaps it gives the bigger picture. We can certainly look to build that into future reports. Thank you.
If there's no further questions, I'll ask Councillor Conroyson to turn off his microphone, and then move to the recommendations that the Audit and Governance Committee notes the content of the report, including the update to the annual Corporate Health and Safety Report 23-24 and the progress against the internal audit management actions. And I don't think we have any issues to raise with a cabinet member. So is that agreed? Okay, that moves us to item 12 on the agenda, the complaints guidance and process, to be introduced by Gareth John. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This report presents two documents for the Audit and Governance Committee to review and comment upon. The first one is guidance on the Winchester City Council Councillor Code of Conduct, based on Local Government Association issued guidance and updated following discussion by the Constitutional Working Group meeting of the 6th of September 2024. And secondly, the arrangements for dealing with complaints under the Code of Conduct. Both documents are to support the effective implementation of the new Code of Conduct from the 1st of January 25 and aim to equip councillors and members of the public with a comprehensive understanding of the expectations and procedures associated with the new Code of Conduct. At its meeting on 26th of September 2024, the Audit and Governance Committee recommended to full council that the Local Government Association Model Code of Conduct for councillors be adopted as the Winchester City Council Code of Conduct, coming into force on the 1st of January 25. Secondly, that all councillors attend training on the new code on the 14th of November 2024. And finally, the monitoring officer advised all parish and town councils of the adoption of the code. It was also noted at the meeting that officers would provide a further report to the committee concerning the associated guidance and arrangements for dealing with complaints to the Audit and Governance Committee at its November 2024 meeting. Full council at its meeting on the 6th of November 24 agreed the recommendations above. Officers undertook an all-member briefing on the 14th of November on the Code of Conduct, and recording of this is being made available to all of those members that were unable to attend. The monitoring officer is also advising all parish and town councils of the adoption of the code and providing a copy of the briefing session. The guidance document attached to your report has been subdivided into three distinct subsections to assist those reading it, with the three sections being, firstly, an introduction and general principles, secondly, obligations under the code, and finally, interests. The revised complaint handling document in Appendix 2 provides a more comprehensive and structured guidance on the complaint handling process. This includes specific roles, timescales, and detailed steps for each stage of the process. The intention was to make the document more codified, explanatory, and supportive, aiming to help both complainants and councillors to understand the process. In particular, a couple of points from the revised document. It details the roles of the complainant, subject member, monitoring officer, independent person, and the standards subcommittee. Introduces a new section on indicative timescales for various stages of the complaints process and provides clear timelines for each key stage. It describes the steps involved in handling a complaint from initial assessment through to potential investigation and subsequent resolution. It outlines the procedure for a hearing before the standards subcommittee, including the roles of the investigating officer and the subject member. It explains the conditions under which complaints will be published on the council's website, which is another new section of the document. Overall, this revised document aims to make the complaint handling process more transparent and accessible for everybody involved. Finally, members, the recommendations are the Audit and Governance Committee is asked to review, comment and endorse the guidance and arrangements for dealing with complaints as attached as appendices 1 and 2 to this report. Secondly, recommend to full council the adoption of the arrangements for dealing with the Code of Conduct Complaints, Appendix 2, as a document that's incorporated into the council's constitution. And finally, to note that the monitoring officer will advise all town and parish councils within the district of the guidance and arrangements for dealing with complaints, including the offer of an online training session. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any questions from councillors? Councillor Power.
Thank you, Chairman. Could I just query the offer of online training to parishes? I think we have in the past tried to hold local training sessions for parish councillors, and I'm just querying whether the online sessions will get a better take up or whether we would be better holding, taking the training to them. Thank you.
Thank you. So as an initial step, we'll be sharing a recording of the training that you all received on the 14th of November. Subject to demand, we would then offer an online training session or even an in-person session, were that to be something that parish councils wanted to take up.
Chairman, if I may, would that be based on a cluster of parish councils to optimise resources and travelling time?
Yes, indeed, that could be coordinated to involve a cluster of councils, yeah.
As a follow-up to that, before Councillor Coffey gets to turn, would I be correct in characterising that members of parish councils are going to be obligated to follow this code of conduct, even if they haven't read the guidance? So saying they haven't received the guidance or read it would be no defence, as it were.
Parish councils are not obliged to adopt the same code of conduct as Winchester City Council.
If they have adopted it,
yeah,
then the members need to have read the code of conduct, effectively.
Yes, yeah.
Councillor Godfrey.
Thank you. Do we have a proposed schedule for rolling out to the parishes? I know my parishes in my ward are very keen to get it done before the May elections.
Yes, so an email has already gone out, or is going out to parish councils today, tomorrow, which will include the steps that this council has taken to date. And I'd be looking to roll this out as early as possible. So they'll be receiving a follow-up email following this meeting, advising them what the City Council has done and offering them training early in the new year. Thank you.
Councillor Godfrey.
As Councillor Power indicated, online training doesn't necessarily deliver the impact of other face-to-face. And given that only a third of our number attended the session on the 14th of November, having voted for it on the council meeting, I'm concerned that many will not have noted the obligations in the new code of conduct. How are we to ensure that our colleagues will all be aware of those obligations, and what additional steps can be taken rather than other than just sending around the presentation?
Thank you. Firstly, I think it was rather more than a third that attended on the night. I defer to Matthew Watson to confirm the actual number. Sorry.
It was 25, I think.
Okay, so yeah, so following that, obviously it's going to be sent out as a recording to all of the members, and they'll be required to, that those that were unable to attend will be required to reply confirming that they've watched the video and understood it. And should there be any requests for additional training or additional questions, my door is always open and I'm happy to provide a follow-up session.
Thank you. I would add to that when it was brought before council, I did mention what the main differences to the existing code of conduct were. So when the members voted for it, they would have been aware of what I told them 10 minutes beforehand. I think the only thing I didn't mention is that we now are obligated to mention offers of gifts as well as gifts themselves. I think that's the only other significant difference. Okay, Councillor Chamberlain.
Thank you, Chair. I guess, building on that, I'm conscious obviously that we discussed this previously at audit governance and obviously indeed at full council, and in a sense don't want to reopen the discussion. My question is, in my short time as council, I've effectively had 3 monitoring officers, either in a permanent or acting capacity, and with any guidance, there's always going to be a kind of degree of interpretation that kind of runs alongside that. So my question is, can we get a view on kind of how we should draw the line between political debate and something that could be potentially construed as a personal attack? So, and I ask that because, given that the very nature of the council disagreement, given different political affiliations, whether it be at a city council or indeed perhaps even at a parish level, is to be expected. But obviously that always needs to be handled in a correct manner. So I'm just, curious of your view.
Thank you. That's a very difficult question to give an absolute line on, as I'm sure you're aware. I'm always happy to be able to provide advice. I mean, without a specific set of facts in front of me, obviously it's quite difficult to comment on that. I think the best advice is to read the guidance in some detail, and I suppose take the Nolan principles to heart. I mean, it's that's really all I think I could say on that. Like I said, without a specific set of facts in front of me. But thank you for the question.
As a follow-up for that, would having been on the internet for 25 years, I realise how sort of controversial seemingly innocuous statements can be. And given that the provision allows for people to express their opinions and concerns in forceful terms, would you say the weight is on someone intending offence or someone taking offence at what someone has said? Again,
It is another tricky question. That there is definitely a balancing act in there, and I think it's yeah. I mean, I think if I were a member, I would be erring on the side of caution, and I'd be choosing my words very carefully.
That's useful guidance. Any other, Councillor Conway-Stone.
Yeah, thank you. Hopefully this is not such a tricky question. And the question relates to the relationship between parish councils and the MO role that you're recently been appointed to. As I understand it, if there's a complaint within a parish council environment, it comes to the city council MO to deal with it in whatever way is appropriate according to the rules. But you've also said that they're not obligated to adopt this code of conduct. They can have in effect their own code of conduct. How does that work for you and your team, having to deal with a complaint of behaviour, I guess, or maybe some other type of complaint, when the rules are not the rules that you've effectively endorsed or helped create and encouraged all of us to work to? I'm sure that's not an uncommon situation for people in the legal environment having to refer to a different set of rules, but just enlighten me on that, please.
They are obliged to have a code of conduct, and the majority of them are based to some extent on the LGA, but it will be set out in their constitution, so it's not sort of hugely difficult to sort of move from one to the other. But there is a strong recommendation that that parish councils would adopt the LGA model as we have.
I'll just ask a clarification just for my own sort of interest is if you're supposed to mention gifts or potential gifts above £50. If you are invited to an event which you turn down, does that count as the offer of a gift? And if you turn it down because you couldn't go, so it was never an option of accepting the gift, does that count as a gift?
I think it could, yeah, and I think my advice would be to report it, so that we can record it. So again, it will depend on the type of event, really. If it's and obviously the onus is on the member to put sort of a notional value on it, and but my recommendation would be to report.
I only ask because I'm sure the councillors receive emails with invitations to events which we turn down as a matter of course all the time. So it would be onerous for us to register every single one necessarily. Councillor Brophy.
Just with regards to the complaint process, the details of the numbers of complaints indicate that it can be hugely dependent on very specific events from which can cascade many different complaints and consume more time. And it's a somewhat unpredictable factor. So you can't look at, say, last year was better than this year and draw any conclusions. I'm taking from what's noted here that there's no obvious patterns that can be analysed. But do we have a view on whether or not, say, the 2024 25 175-hour time commitment of dealing with complaints, which is mentioned here, do we have a view of whether that's too much or good, or something we can need to streamline or are attempting to streamline? Another question is that handling complaints, whether or not there's a process of mediation as well as a process of, say, confrontation implicit in how things are addressed.
So just on the second question, yeah, absolutely. We would always seek to try and informally resolve a complaint at the earliest possible opportunity. On your first question, I'm just going to defer to Mrs. Kirkman, who is monitoring officer for that period.
Thank you, Mr. John. Good evening, members. Yes, indeed, it's very difficult to say that 175 hours is reflective of dealing with 15 complaints, because some complaints can be very quick and very easy to process. Some can come in and appear very simple and then be incredibly difficult. We have had, I think, 2 or 3 in particular complaints this year that have been unbelievably complex due to circumstances surrounding those complaints. One indeed was completely unique to me as a monitoring officer. 15 years, it was new. That takes a lot of time. I would say there's much more time that we spend in mediating than we do in processing complaints, absolutely, because we would prefer to have those conversations and prevent the complaint landing. But absolutely, I think we're as skilled as mediators as we are as lawyers. So yeah, it's definitely something that's difficult. In terms of trends, the annual report of the monitoring officer does try to look back and pick up on any trends. Certainly in the first report, I think that was 21-22, there was a trend that because all the meetings had been online during COVID, there were a lot of complaints being made because microphones were picking up on laptops the comments that you used to mutter under your breath. I can say that wasn't any city councillors, I'm sure, but particularly in the parishes, those comments were being picked up. People were taking offence by those and therefore complaining. So that was a trend that I reported back a few years ago, but no real trends in terms of the complaints. I think we'll be moving on to this report, Chair, so I'll stop now on that one.
Yes, we'll be covering this as item 13 as well, so we've had a bit of a spoiler there. So Councillor Godfrey.
A couple of minor points. One, it was an inclusion of an extra example in page 344, which I think is a repeat, but because the examples are so good, I think it would be useful just to make sure we include those examples that should be in there. The middle example seems to be a duplicate. On page 3. Yes, and the other one is about the formation of a standard subcommittee. I'm not sure I'm familiar with how a subcommittee gets appointed. There doesn't seem to be any mention of it in the new process. apart from it has to be members of this committee, but not how those members are appointed for each subcommittee. I wonder if there's an answer to that.
I shall defer to the monitoring officer.
Thanks. And Mrs. Kirkman's actually going to take this one.
Yeah, of course, happy to help. Councillor Godfrey, it's very much a case of availability because they tend to be meetings in the daytime. So all members of the Audits and Governance Committee are contacted with a selection of dates and times. Clearly, we're aligning that with the availability of the subject member, any witnesses, the investigating officer. So it can be quite a drawn out process, simply getting that availability confirmed. We also try to seek political balance within the subcommittee as well. So we do always seek to do that. Yes.
Any further questions on this on section on number 12? Okay, moving to general comment discussion. Okay, then I suggest.
Chairman,
Councillor
I just say I don't think the availability of face-to-face training sessions with parishes is adequately portrayed, and maybe should push that a little more. I think, as Councillor Godfrey says, you get far more value from face-to-face sessions if it is viable.
Thank you. So I would add that the availability of the PDF of the document isn't necessarily user-friendly for everyone who isn't computer literate. So you want hard copies available to every parish that adopts the code of conduct, I think. I see Councillor Cutler shaking his head in dismay, but he's not part of this meeting. Okay, so I move to the recommendations. One, which review, comment and endorse the guidance and arrangement for dealing with complaints as attached to Appendix 1 and 2 to this report. Is that agreed? Agreed. I hear a lovely cause to agree there. Right. Recommend to the full council the adoption of the arrangements for dealing with code of conduct complaints, which is in Appendix 2, as a document that is going to be incorporated into the council's constitution. So me bringing this up again at full council. Is that agreed? Agreed, thank you. Note that the monitoring officer will advise all town and parish councils within the district of the guidance and arrange for dealing with complaints, including the offer of an online training session. That's agreed, thank you. So moving to item, Councillor Godfrey, go for it.
Now we have concluded a review of the constitution. At this version of a review, I do think the committee should consider thanking the monitoring officers in their different guises for the diligence in completing this very difficult task, which has taken less time than we expected it to this year and last year. And certainly from my point of view, I think it went very smoothly. And thank you very much, Mrs. Kirkman, for that in particular.
I completely endorse that. I was going to save my thanks to Lisa after her presentation, but I'm happy to thank her beforehand. So moving on to item 13 then, which is the monitoring officer's annual report. Lisa Copeman.
Thank you, Chair. Members, this is the third and final monitoring officer report from myself, and I'm pleased to confirm a productive year. Would not have been possible without my small but perfectly formed team of Matthew Watson and David Blakemore. And together we have advertised, recruited and inducted 3 independent persons, adopted the LGA Model Code of Conduct as our own, with accompanying guidance and updated arrangements, processed and closed 17 complaints, and trained new councillors on the Code of Conduct as was. In my report, I've tried to give you a flavour of the national picture in respect of governance, as I think it's vital for this committee to understand the role of good governance in the council, as well as highlighting the new code of practice for good governance for local authority statutory officers, which indicates great progress in understanding the critical nature of these roles. And finally, not in my report, but I will say this as many times as I enable, the Corporate Peer Challenge team were in earlier this year, and their assessment of our governance was that overall it's strong at Winchester City Council, which is reassuring. Chair, happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Councillor Power.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm looking at paragraph 1114, where you You say that the progress hoped for has not been made. I'm wondering if that's a reference to the Denmead problems in the previous paragraph, or whether that's a general reflection on the complaints that you have received.
No, that's in reference to Denmead. When I've reflected back over the year, because I look for trends or where there was a particular amount of time, if there were particular problems, whether they were in the city council or in the parishes, my reflection on this year is that I wasn't assured that all is well and that the good progress that we'd hoped from the significant investigation that was concluded in 2022, that all of those recommendations had been acted upon. So I've asked Gareth, as new monitoring officer, to pick that up with the parish and to work with them to establish whether there is a need for that to come back before the Audits and Governance Committee, because it did in March 23. Councillor Powell, thank you.
Councillor Powell, do you have a follow-up? Are you happy?
I look forward to seeing that report, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Chamberlain.
Councillor Barr kind of just beat me to it, but in 1113, the preceding paragraph, it kind of infers that work is still going on. So quite simply, I was going to follow up and say almost exactly what Councillor Powell said, that it would be good to see the follow on to that report, seeing as we last saw an update in March 23.
I have a question on 1114, which is calls and emails of concern which do not lead to complaints being received. Would you regard that as a good outcome, or if that it's not been progressed to a complaint, or a bad outcome that it's not been, that they've decided not to take it further?
I would say it's very, very rare that where there is a bona fide complaint that needs to be made, that someone is put off by doing so simply by speaking to the monitoring officer or anyone else in the team. What we find is that often someone picks up the phone when they are angry or emotional and want to find a way to vent some of that, and sometimes simply having that conversation, understanding what the process is and what it might be, means that they simply offloading to somebody means that they don't pursue a complaint. Whether or not someone pursues a complaint, if there is bad behaviour reported to the monitoring officer, they are able to act upon that if they wish. So an example, if there is bad behaviour in the chamber, I don't wait for the complaint to land on my desk. I will speak to the leader of the group and that individual member the day after the meeting. I can only recall that happening once in several years, but we seek to be proactive in dealing with complaints rather than waiting for them to land on the desk.
So if you receive a call email which is venting, is that still noted against the person who's complained against?
Not formally in terms of the we have a log of complaints. So where someone has made a phone call, we monitor whether we get a follow-up complaint or not, but that's not in any of the recorded information that we report in the quarterly governance reports to this committee.
Thank you. Councillor Godfrey.
Mindful of the discussion we just had on the code of conduct and not wishing to besmirch the work of other people, what the point of 1115, the code of practice on good governance, the golden triangle of our three senior officers, is this really what our senior staff are spending their time doing, writing this drivel? It is absolutely nonsense in terms of what our priority should be. It is very sensible. If we didn't actually have phrases like the golden triangle of and the 7 principles of leadership, for goodness sake, I'm glad to see that in the report we do not actually want to do anything with this particular document. I just hope we haven't spent too much money on it. What's the point?
Thank you, Councillor Godfrey. I was under the impression that it was provided by Solace, SIPFA and LLG, and it wasn't necessarily the work of officers, but Lisa will be able to clarify that.
Yeah, no Winchester City Council monies were spent, Councillor Godfrey, I can confirm. In respect of, I understand where you're coming from. And I'm very confident that the relationship with the Golden Triangle, it's a really common way of referring to those three officers, I'm afraid, Councillor Godfrey. I'm very confident in the relationship with the Golden Triangle and the various officers that have been in those posts is very good and strong here at Winchester. So certainly when I read the code, I wasn't immediately jumping into action because there were things that we should be doing that we aren't doing. What I would say is that those lessons learned from the commissioners that are going into other councils is that there are huge failings within governance and that can land at the doorstep of the chief executive, the 151 or the monitoring officer, and therefore this code was actually welcomed nationally as being a document that means that the Golden Triangle can be held to account, but also it's something there to help and assist them because sometimes it can be a very lonely place. Councillor Godfrey.
Any other questions from councillors on this report or the Golden Triangle? No? Okay, so I shall move to debate. Any general comments on the report? Councillor Cormoyson.
Slightly flippant report. It's probably better called the Golden Triangle than the Bermuda Triangle when it's considering complaints.
Thank you. And then I suggest we move to the recommendations, which is that the Audit and Governance Committee notes the Monitoring Officer's annual report 23-24 and thanks the Monitoring Officer for all her work over the past year, I think it is. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Great. Thank you very much. I have nothing left on the agenda, so unless anyone else is going to interrupt me, we're going to declare this meeting over. Thank you very much. Cheers.